My stepfather said I'd never be his real daughter, so I made sure he'd never be my real father. I was 12 when Mom brought him home for the first time. This tall man with calloused hands and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He seemed nice enough at first, bringing me chocolate bars and asking about school, but there was something underneath that made my stomach twist whenever he looked at me too long. Mom was so happy though, happier than I'd seen her since Dad left when I was 8. She would hum while cooking dinner and actually wear makeup to the grocery store, things she hadn't done in years. I wanted her to stay happy, so I tried to like him, really tried. The first 6 months were okay, I guess. He moved in gradually, one box at a time, until suddenly our tiny apartment felt even smaller with his presence filling every corner. His coffee mug sat next to ours, his boots by the door, his baseball games on our TV every weekend. Then Mom got pregnant, and everything changed overnight. Suddenly, he had opinions about everything I did, from how I dressed to who I talked to at school. He started making comments about my attitude, my grades, my friends, always with this tone like I was just some burden he had to deal with. The baby came when I was 13, this perfect little boy who looked exactly like him. I loved my baby brother immediately, but watching them together made something inside me ache. The way he held him so carefully, the way his whole face lit up when the baby smiled, the way he would spend hours just talking to him in this soft voice I'd never heard before. That's when the comparisons started. My brother was smart, I was average. My brother was well-behaved, I was difficult. My brother was his real son, I was just his wife's kid. He never said that last part out loud, but I could feel it in every interaction, every eye roll, every time he chose to help my brother with something instead of me. Mom was so exhausted, with the baby that she barely noticed how differently he treated us. Or maybe she noticed, but pretended not to, because acknowledging it would mean admitting her perfect new family wasn't so perfect after all. I started acting out, staying out late, letting my grades slip, anything to get some attention even if it was negative. That just made him more convinced that I was trouble, that I was the problem disrupting his happy home. The breaking point came when I was 15. I'd been accepted to this amazing summer program for kids interested in science, something I'd dreamed about for months. It was expensive, but I'd saved up half the money from babysitting and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. I brought the acceptance letter home so excited, practically bouncing as I showed it to Mom and him at dinner. Mom was thrilled, already talking about how proud she was and how this could open doors for my future. But he just frowned and shook his head. He said we couldn't afford it, that it was a waste of money, that I probably wouldn't even stick with it anyway since I never finished anything I started. Mom tried to argue, pointing out that I'd already saved half the money myself, but he shut her down with this look that made her go quiet. Then he said the words that changed everything between us forever. He said that if I was his real daughter, maybe he'd consider it. But since I wasn't, he didn't see why he should sacrifice his son's future for some program that probably wouldn't even matter in a few years. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom just sat there staring at her plate, and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I was 15 years old, and the man who'd been in my life for 3 years, who I'd tried so hard to please, had just told me I would never be family to him. I ran to my room and slammed the door, crying harder than I had since Dad left. But somewhere between the tears and the rage, something crystallized in my mind. If I would never be his real daughter, then he would never be my real father either. I started planning that night, writing in my journal about all the ways he'd hurt me, all the times he'd made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. I documented every unfair comparison, every time he chose my brother over me, every moment he made me feel invisible. But I was smart about it. I didn't lash out or throw tantrums anymore. Instead, I became the perfect stepdaughter on the surface, polite and helpful, and never giving him any reason to complain about my behavior. Underneath, though, I was gathering ammunition. I started recording conversations on my phone when he would make his cruel comments, always when Mom wasn't around. I kept a detailed log of every time he spent money on my brother, but refused to spend it on me. I saved every text message, every email, every piece of evidence that showed his favoritism. The summer program thing was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, there were dozens of similar incidents. When I wanted to try out for the debate team but needed money for tournament fees, he said no. When my brother wanted to join Little League, he signed him up immediately and bought him all new equipment. When I asked for help with college applications, he said I should probably just go to community college since I wasn't that smart anyway. When people asked about my brother's future, he would beam with pride and talk about all the opportunities his son would have. Mom started noticing more as I got older, especially when I began applying for colleges. She could see how differently he treated us, but by then she was so deep in the relationship, so financially dependent on him, that she didn't know how to change things. Senior year was when I put my plan into action. I'd been accepted to several colleges, including one with a full scholarship that would cover everything. It was far away, across the country, but it was my ticket to freedom. The night before I was supposed to give my final answer to the college, he cornered me in the kitchen. He told me that he thought I was making a mistake, that I wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility, that I should stay home and go to the local community college instead. He said I was being selfish, thinking only about myself instead of my family. He said Mom needed me at home to help with my brother, that I was abandoning them just like my real father had abandoned me. That's when I smiled and told him I had something to show him. I pulled out my phone and played back a recording from the previous week, where he'd told my brother that he was lucky to have such a smart, capable son, unlike some people in the family who would probably never amount to anything. The look on his face was priceless. He tried to grab my phone, but I was ready for that. I told him I had dozens of recordings, hundreds of text messages, years of documentation showing exactly how he'd treated me compared to my brother. Then I told him about the college counselor I'd been talking to, how I'd shared some of my experiences with her, how she'd connected me with resources for students from complicated family situations. I told him about the scholarship committee who'd been so impressed by my essay about overcoming adversity at home. But here's the twist he never saw coming. I told him I'd also been in contact with my biological father. I'd found him on social media 2 years earlier, but had never reached out because I was afraid of being rejected again. But as I'd gotten older and stronger, I'd finally sent him a message. We'd been talking regularly for months, and he'd been helping me with college applications and planning for my future. My real father had been devastated to learn how I'd been treated, how I'd been made to feel unwelcome in my own home. He'd offered to help with college expenses, to be there for me in all the ways this man had refused to be. The look of shock and anger on his face was everything I'd hoped for. He'd spent years making me feel like I was nothing, like I didn't matter, like I was just an inconvenience he had to tolerate. But now he was faced with the reality that I had another father, one who actually wanted me. I told him I was taking the scholarship and moving across the country for college. I told him I wouldn't be coming home for holidays or summers, that I'd found a family who actually valued me. I told him that since he'd made it clear I would never be his real daughter, he would never have the chance to be my real father. Mom cried when I told her, but she understood. She knew she'd failed to protect me, failed to stand up for me when it mattered most. She promised to do better with my brother, to make sure he grew up knowing that love isn't conditional on blood relations. The day I left for college was both the hardest and the easiest day of my life. Hard because I was leaving my mom and baby brother. Easy because I was finally free from someone who'd made me feel worthless for years. College was everything I dreamed it would be. I threw myself into my studies, made incredible friends, found professors who believed in me and pushed me to be better. I discovered talents I never knew I had, passions I'd never been allowed to explore. My real father and I built a relationship slowly, carefully. He'd made mistakes when I was younger, but he owned up to them and worked to make things right. He came to my college graduation, tears in his eyes as he watched me walk across the stage. I graduated with honors and got accepted to graduate school with full funding. I started dating someone who treats me with respect and kindness, someone who makes me feel valued and loved. I built a life that's entirely my own, far from the shadow of someone who tried to make me feel small. But the real surprise came last year when I got a call from Mom. She told me that my stepfather had been asking about me, wondering if I might come home for the holidays. Apparently, my brother had been asking questions about why his sister never visited, why she didn't seem to be part of the family anymore. Mom said he'd been forced to confront the reality of his choices, to see how his treatment of me had affected everyone in the family. My brother was starting to understand that something had been wrong, that his father had driven away his sister through his own actions. The final twist came when Mom told me he'd started going to counseling, trying to understand why he'd been so cruel to a child who'd done nothing wrong. He'd apparently realized that his behavior had damaged not just me, but the entire family, and he was trying to figure out how to make amends. But here's the thing about consequences: they're not always reversible. You can't take back years of making someone feel unwanted, years of treating them like they don't matter. You can't undo the damage of telling a child they'll never be good enough, never be family. I told Mom I was glad he was getting help, that I hoped it would make him a better father to my brother. But I also told her that ship had sailed for me. I'd found my real father, built relationships with people who valued me, created a life where I was surrounded by love and support. I didn't need his acceptance anymore because I'd learned to accept myself. I didn't need his approval because I'd found people who saw my worth without conditions. I didn't need him to call me his daughter because I'd discovered what it meant to be truly loved by a parent. The last conversation I had with him was brief and to the point. He called me directly, something he'd never done before, and tried to apologize. He said he'd been wrong, that he'd let his own issues affect how he treated me, that he wanted to make things right. I listened to everything he had to say, and then I told him I appreciated his apology, but that it didn't change anything. I told him I'd moved on, built a life without him, and that I was happier than I'd ever been. Then I told him the truth that I'd figured out over the years. He'd never been my real father anyway. Being a real father isn't about biology or marriage certificates or shared DNA. It's about showing up, believing in someone, making them feel valued and loved unconditionally. He'd had the chance to be that person for me, and he'd chosen not to take it. Now someone else had stepped into that role, someone who saw me as worthy of love and support and encouragement. I hung up the phone and felt nothing but peace. I'd spent years carrying around the pain of his rejection, the weight of feeling unwanted in my own home. But somewhere along the way, I'd learned that his opinion of me said everything about him and nothing about me. Today, I'm successful in my career, surrounded by people who love me, planning a future with someone who makes me feel like I'm the most important person in the world. I have a relationship with my real father that grows stronger every year, and I've learned what it means to be truly valued by a parent. My stepfather lost his chance to be my real father the day he told me I'd never be his real daughter. But in the end, I won because I found something better. I found myself, and I found people who love me exactly as I am. The irony isn't lost on me. He spent years trying to make me feel like I didn't belong, like I wasn't worthy of love or investment. But all he really did was push me toward people who could see my worth, who were willing to invest in my future, who made me feel like I belonged exactly where I was. I never needed his love to be complete. I just needed to stop waiting for it and start building something better. And that's exactly what I did.